What we know as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or some people still call it ADD, attention deficit disorder, has been recognized by some doctors since way back in 1902. But from 1902 until 1980, it was all about little boys who couldn't sit still, couldn't shut up, and were driving everybody nuts. It was just behavior problems. The name of the disorder was changed a number of times, and there were different formulations, but it was all about behavior problems. Since 1980, which is when they first changed the name of the disorder to include the words attention deficit, we've realized that this is not so much a behavior problem, but far more a problem with the brain's management system, its executive functions. And we've also learned that there are many people who have ADHD who've never had any significant behavior problems, and that even for those who have, that's usually the least of it. It's the attention problems that tend to make more trouble for people, particularly as they get a little bit older and more is expected of them for being able to manage themselves. One thing that's important to be clear about from the very beginning is that ADHD has nothing to do with how smart a person is. There's some people who have this who are like super smart. Others high average, middle average, low average, slow. I treat people for this who are like university professors and doctors and lawyers and big shots in business. A lot of people who are regular folks. Some people have trouble doing the basics. You can be anything along the IQ spectrum and still have ADHD. It has nothing to do with how smart you are. The other thing to know is that this is a problem, a set of problems, that include a wide range of characteristics. And what I'd like to do today is to describe for you some of the characteristics of what we call ADHD, give some examples of them, and then talk a little bit about what we know about what's involved in the brain in the course of ADHD. One thing that's important is that people, one of the main things that people with ADHD complain about is they have trouble staying tuned. That when they're listening or reading or working on something, they get part of it, but then it sort of drifts off, and then they're back, and then they drift off, and it drifts off again, and then they're back. They have difficulty staying tuned. It's similar in a way to the problem you have with a cell phone, where you're in an area where you don't have good reception, you can get part of it, and then the message keeps fading in and out. The other thing is that they often have a problem with being distracted. Like anybody else, they see and hear things that are going on around them. They have thoughts going through their head. But most people, if they have something they've got to focus on, can push that stuff out of the way and focus on what they've got to do. People with AD, it's real hard for them to do that. You know, they'll be sitting in a classroom trying to listen to what's going on, or perhaps they'll be in a meeting, or sitting down trying to read something or write something, and somebody drops a pencil and they have to sort of check and see where did the pencil go. And then they'll be back on task again for a couple of minutes. Then they're thinking about some TV show they saw the night before. Then they're back on task again for a minute, and they're thinking about some conversation they had with somebody 2 hours ago. And then they're back on task again for a few minutes. And then they're looking out the window like anybody else will from time to time, but they're likely to sit and watch the squirrel go up the tree a little longer than somebody else and be checking out the traffic and the cloud formation, the guy who's mowing the lawn. Then they're back on task again for a few minutes. And they'll be thinking about what they're going to do when this is over and how soon is this thing going to be over anyhow. I've got things I've got to do. And what am I going to have for supper tonight? And I wonder what's on TV tonight. All these things are coming in all at one time, and it's almost like you're trying to watch TV and you've got 4 different stations all coming in at the same time on one channel, and it gets kind of hard to separate the signal from the noise. But the things that's puzzling about this, that really makes it very difficult for people to understand, is for people who have ADHD, it's like that almost all the time, but not always. Everybody I've ever seen who has ADD, and that's a lot of people, has a few things they can do where they have no trouble paying attention, no trouble focusing. Let me give you an example. 16-year-old boy I saw, he was the goaltender for his school's ice hockey team. And it just happened that the day his parents brought him in to see me was the day after his team had just won the state championship in ice hockey. So they're bragging a little bit at the beginning about how great he was in the tournament the day before, and apparently he was a very good goalie. They said when he was in the net playing hockey, he missed nothing. He knew where the puck was every second of a fast game, totally on top of it, the kind of goalie every team wants. Smart kid, tested way high up in the superior range, wanted to get good grades, was hoping to go to medical school, but he was always in trouble with his teachers. And what they say to him is, you know, once in a while you'll say something that shows how smart you are. Well, we'll be talking about something. You'll come in with some comment that's really very perceptive, and it's quite impressive. But most of the time, you're out to lunch. You're looking out the window. You're staring at the ceiling. You look like you're half asleep. Half the time, you don't even know what page we're on. And the question he kept asking him was, if you can pay attention so well when you're playing hockey, how come you can't pay attention when you're sitting in class? Or here's another example. A lot of times parents will bring in kids for me to see, and they say, no, the teacher says this kid can't pay attention for more than 5 minutes. We know that's not true. We have watched her play video games. And she can sit and play those video games for 3 hours at a time and not move. And the teacher said she's easily distracted. That's nonsense. When she's playing those games, she's locked on that screen like a laser, and the only way you're going to get her attention is to jump in her face or turn off the TV. So again, it's like, you can do it here, why can't you do it there? Now, it's not always sports or video games. There's some people with ADD, they're not good at that stuff. They might be into art, and they're sketching and drawing and really getting into it. Somebody else, when they're little, they're creating engineering marvels with Lego blocks. And then when they're older, they're taking car engines apart and putting them back together or designing computer networks. But everybody I've ever seen who has ADHD has a few things they can do where they have no trouble paying attention, even though on almost everything else, they've got a lot of trouble paying attention. And if you ask them about it, say, what's with this? How come you can do it here and you can't do it here, here, and here? Usually what they'll say is, it's easy. If it's something I'm interested in, I can pay attention. If not, I can't. And most people hear that and they say, yeah, right, congratulations. That's true for anybody. Anybody's going to pay attention better for something they're interested in than for something they're not, which is true. But here's the difference. People who don't have ADHD, if they've got something they've got to do and they know they've got to do it and it's important, they can usually make themselves pay attention, even if it's pretty boring, just because they know they have to do it. People with ADD, it is incredibly difficult for them to be able to make themselves pay attention. Unless the task is something that's really interesting to them, not because somebody told them it ought to be interesting, but just because it is interesting to them for whatever reasons. Or if they feel like they have a gun to their head and something very unpleasant is going to be happening very fast if they don't take care of this right here, right now. Under those two conditions, no problem. They can focus very well. Anything else, it's really difficult for them to focus. But the problem is, this is not something that's under voluntary control. It makes it look like it's a problem with willpower. If you can do it here, why can't you do it here, here, and here? But it's not a problem with willpower. It's a problem with the way the brain is wired. All the characteristics of ADHD, which I'm going to be describing here, are things everybody has trouble with sometimes. It's just people with ADD have a lot more trouble with it. So in that sense, ADHD is not an all or nothing deal like pregnancy. Either you are pregnant or you're not pregnant, and there's nothing in between. It's more like depression, where everybody gets bummed out once in a while, but just because somebody's unhappy for a couple of days doesn't mean we're going to diagnose them as clinically depressed. It's only when those depressive symptoms are persistent and pervasive and making a lot of trouble for me, say, yeah, that's a depression. We ought to do something about it. So all the characteristics of ADHD are problems everybody has sometimes. It's just with people who have ADD, they just have a lot more difficulty with it more of the time. And the problem is it is not under voluntary control. It's not something you can do with willpower.